Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds NFL Draft Preview Special presented by Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. It's the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside Adam Caplan, and joining us as always for these kind of matters is our tape breakdown guru, Greg Cosell from NFL Films. You've seen him on Inside the Birds pregame live throughout the NFL season, and of course co-host of the NFL Matchup Show on ESPN. We're all with you here for the next 90 minutes as we got the tick, tick, tick countdown to the first round of the NFL Draft, and it's shaping up to be quite an exciting night. I don't know about you guys, but I'm glad we're really getting close to the moment because I'm sort of excited to witness what many people have said to myself, and I imagine you guys, is going to be an unpredictable an uncertain draft night, pretty much starting at pick number 2 overall with the Houston Texans. And of course, we know the Eagles have 2 first-round picks to discuss. But Adam, does that jibe with what you're hearing about the sort of unpredictability of this draft?
This is 21 years. I've never seen. I can't even. I think I knew it was going to go at 2, but do I know for sure? No. It usually, and we all know this, when there are a decent amount of elite players, you could pretty much fill it in. Not this year. It's difficult, though. I will tell you, I knew this was going to happen because we kind of hinted at this. We said, folks, we're going to have a lot more information for you from our Thursday morning show that dropped. Geoff and I exchanged notes it took us almost an hour and a half today. It's the most we've ever talked on the day of the draft. It's crazy, and we had to sort through some of the nonsense that's out there. But we've got a lot more information. We can't wait to talk about it. A couple of things that came to us today. We're like, okay, we'll have to look more into this, but there's a lot of unpredictability because there are not a lot of great players, a lot of very good players, particularly at certain positions. But when you don't have a lot of elite players, you've got a lot of mystery.
So that's a good point. I wanted to ask Greg about this as someone who watches, countless prospects, hundreds upon hundreds every year, right? Just in preparation of the draft alone. Is it hard? Does that ever jump out at you? Like, I noticed in watching this year's 300 or so players that the quality. No, I know I exaggerate a little bit.
You might have
put a lot of hours in.
We're getting close, and
we're getting close. All right.
Yeah.
Does it strike you that sometimes the quality of an overall class is better, worse, or deeper, stronger in some areas than others, year after year?
I probably see that more positionally, Geoff, as opposed to overall, because I don't necessarily think over like. Maybe it's me. I don't know how people do, other people do their work, but it's hard for me, which is why I don't do a draft board, by the way. It's hard for me to compare a left tackle and a wide receiver, where they would go on a draft board. I know teams have to do that. And there's people who are very experienced doing that. I've never done that, so I don't think like that. I think more in terms of positions.
Right.
So, like, for instance, I would say this year, the wide receiver position, for instance, there's probably not a player as we speak tonight, an hour and a half before the draft starts, who's considered a true alpha dog, like let's say Jamar Chase was 2 years ago. Now, does that mean none of these receivers will turn into really good players? Of course not. Some will, and maybe some will be really elite players. But as we sit here tonight before the draft and through this whole process, and I've probably watched 25 or 30 receivers, there's not one guy you come away from your study and say, that guy is an absolute dog. He is clearly a top pick in this, top 5, top 10 pick, and he's going to be a star. Because that's the way I felt when I watched Jamar Chase's tape, and I was not the only one. I'm not suggesting I was the only one. But so I think of it more positionally as opposed to, putting it all together, because in all honesty, after doing this for years, I think I'm pretty good at it, but I just don't know how to compare left guards to cornerbacks. I don't know how to do that.
Greg, I understand.
I just want to jump in one thing, because you mentioned the receiver position, and we all know when the Eagles made the trade up 2 years ago for Devontae Smith, we're like, wow, okay, they finally drafted an Alabama player,
Right.
But you never quite know. It's about projection, right?
It's
he's now
always
entering
about
year
projection.
3.
Yeah.
Yes, he's entering year 3, guys. So, Greg, we'll start with you on this one. Is he what you thought he would be, or is he better?
I loved his tape. I had the same question that everybody had, I'm sure, in meetings leading, up to the draft, teams. how does a 160, 165-pound receiver fit into the league? So I wasn't being profound in saying something that no one else said. His tape was phenomenal. He was a great route runner. He was as smooth as they come. He had the ability to do something that not many can do. Justin Jefferson can do this as well, and he's just a bigger man. He had the ability as a long strider to make cuts without having to slow down. And that's really hard to do when you're a strider. So I loved his tape. I just kept saying to myself, he's 160 pounds. I don't know what that means. I didn't have an answer for that. My guess is if anybody said they had a 100% certain answer, they'd be lying. But it's worked out. The guy's we've seen it. We're in Philadelphia. We do the Eagles. Guy's a great receiver. And he's obviously up to this point, weight has not been an issue at all.
Well, it's a fascinating carryover discussion to this year because there are certainly three prospects that come to my mind, two of which have to be on the Eagles' radar, you'd think, by the position that they play and their talent, that you could have that conversation about, the third of which is going to be the number one overall pick, probably going to be the number one overall pick tonight by the Carolina Panthers. So we'll get into that discussion. I say tonight because we're going to do this for the next hour and a half. We're going to recap what we know. We think Adam and I have done a good job of whittling down exactly what the landscape will look like when the 10th pick is up and the Eagles are on the board, if they stick there. So we'll go through and share some of our last minute intel that Adam was referencing. But also, even after this show, the fun will continue later into the night because the plan for Inside the Birds is to bring you live streams after Eagles make their moves, whether they're picks or their trade downs throughout the night. It'll be myself and Greg Cosell. When the Eagles make these moves, we'll be coming on right after to break them down. So we have a very exciting night of draft coverage planned for you right here on the Inside the Birds channels, YouTube, and other socials. If you have an opportunity right now to hit that share button, that like button, that subscribe button, any button that, helps us out, we would definitely appreciate it. And if you have a question or a comment like we do during the pregame show, if you're able to leave in the chat box, then it'll make its way toward us, I believe, and we will try to answer that. But we really want to spend this hour and a half here going through mostly what's going to happen, we think will happen at 10, and then we will talk a little bit about 30th overall as well before this night is over. Let me just get this out of the way now, fellas, because I feel like after the last week and a half, it might be unsafe for anyone in this area to leave their house if the Eagles pick at 10 and it's not Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas. The people have spoken, on our own Patreon channel. There was like 60, I asked of 4 or so prospects, who would you most likely see the Eagles take? It was overwhelmingly the Texas running back. We did a mock draft from Inside the Birds. At the time we had the Eagles taking Peter Skronsky, the guard out of Northwestern. I think we lost about 1,000 subscriptions just on that alone. so you can see where this is headed as far as the running back, which we know the Eagles haven't picked since 1979. I haven't picked a running back in the first round since 1979.
83. Wow.
Yeah. Well, is that sort of, was it? Oh no, I'm sorry. Linebacker is 79.
Yeah, Jerry Robinson. Yeah,
Yes.
Jerry Robinson. Yeah,
I was getting confused with the many positions the Eagles haven't drafted in the first round since we were all in diapers. I apologize.
Well, we know they're not. We know they're not drafting a linebacker at 10. That we can say with
no
certainty.
chance.
Absolutely can say that.
Oh, wait a minute.
Not an inside linebacker, right?
Right. A stacked backer. They're not taking at 10.
Was Jerry Robinson? I don't know if you remember. Was he a rush outside linebacker?
No. He was not.
Stack? He's a stack.
Okay. He was
Yeah,
because
he was a
Marcus
stack
Smith
backer.
would have broken that streak. So it was, it's still a stack linebacker, as
Gotcha.
Greg said.
Okay.
All right, Adam, I do want to talk about Bijan Robinson here, though, and just kind of the intel that you've gotten, and I'll get Greg's tape review as well, because we did talk about him on the Intel with Greg Cosell on the Inside the Birds platform. But as we get here to the night, I know that you have had a sentiment that there's a good chance that if he gets past the Eagles at 10, that he can go down in this draft because of the nature of the position. I believe I've heard you say you wouldn't be surprised if he went further down in the draft.
Yeah, so if he doesn't go to Atlanta at 8, which 8 to me would be the earliest, it's only because Arthur Smith is a guy that he wants to run the football. They don't have a great quarterback position. They're not going to ask Desmond Ridder to throw the ball to him. They know who they are, and it starts with the running game. But if he doesn't go there, and you and I kind of debated this, it was a very worthwhile discussion. But as I told you, I just don't see any great landing spots. But as you said, look, you never know when a team's going to come out of the blue and trade up for a guy, because this guy, we'll get Greg's opinion in a minute. This guy's the best back since McCaffrey. It's been 6 years ago since a guy's been out there like that. He's a pretty special running back. And by the way, in a draft, this has been sort of my calling card for 2 months. You're not seeing a lot of elite players. And that's the thing that teams have to understand. And this has kind of been our discussion with this. Harry Roseman could want a D lineman, an O lineman. We'll get into those names later about who they should take at 10. But are you taking a player that's not quite as highly graded just because it's a position you want, and the best player, that's Bijan Robinson? And that's something that Howie and Jeffrey Lurie, we know we know what he wants. He's always going to want an offensive player, but he doesn't want a running back. He wants someone who could either throw the football, catch it. Well, guess what? Bijan could catch it. So it's just, to me, with Bijan, to close this off, to me though, if the Eagles board gets blown up, 2 years ago they went up and traded. What was it, 2 spots to get Devontae? Was it 2? Like that?
Yes, 2 or 3 spots. I think it was 2.
Okay. So if they do that, if their board gets blown up and they're not happy with it, and they don't like the players or the group we're going to give you, it's a little bit more expanded from our show this morning. But if they don't like what they're seeing, could he be a trade down candidate? Sure. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but if they were going to trade down, I could see him, based on what we've heard, being on their list.
Mm-hmm.
But there would be other players on their list. This is a weird draft, folks. This is unlike in a whatever year, how many years this has been, 5 years for us. This is a unique draft. It's again, who you trading up for, and who wants to trade up. That's the thing. Like, the below 10, okay. Which players are going to drop tonight? Tyree Smith, we're going to get in him. I got some updated information on him and kind of what I think is going on with him. But that's obviously inside the top 10, because he may drop and towards the back of the top 10.
Who's that? Who'd you say may drop?
Yeah, Tyree Smith may not. He may drop.
Tyree Wilson?
Tyree Wilson, you mean?
I mean, Tyree Smith. Why do I call him Tyree Smith? Tyree Wilson. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, right. He may drop a little bit. His situation's interesting, but it's not so much the foot. It's more because he did not work out for teams for the draft. I don't sense a ton of comfortability with him. We'll see. But when you get past 10, that's when the numbers start looking the same. That's the problem with this draft. We've been saying some teams only see 13 first-round grades. Yes, they're more. Other teams, every team sees it differently. But again, just to move this along here, it's not a great draft.
Yeah, Greg, on that, I'll ask you for your Bijan evaluation in a second, but the Eagles well. Even though you are a tape breakdown guy, you do have a good, keen sense of what the Eagles do and what their identity is. We talk about it on our pregame show quite a bit, and even in our off-season shows. Offensive line, defensive line is typically their identity when they already have an established quarterback.
Right.
I would have to think you'd be surprised if running back went ahead of those 2 positions tonight at 10th overall.
I mean, I would be surprised. I've been giving this a lot of thought, not just with the Eagles, Geoff, but with the running back position in general, because obviously there's this sense that's been happening for years that the position is devalued, that a running back, not necessarily running the ball, but a high-level running back is not needed. I mean, look at what happened in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs came out in the second half with Isaiah Pacheco and ran the ball effectively. Okay, so the thought is, okay, Pacheco is not a high pick. You don't need that guy in order to run the ball effectively, because in today's NFL, the feeling is that you're not building your entire offense around the running game with a running back. It's different if you have a quarterback like the Eagles do that adds to your run game, which in a sense lends more credence to not drafting Bijan Robinson. But think of it this way. Then the flip side of that, and these are the things I think about, I'm a little nuts with this stuff, but these are the things I think about, is if there's an explosive player on the offensive side of the ball and he happens to be, quote unquote, a running back like Bijan Robinson, like Jahmyr Gibbs, doesn't it then become incumbent upon a coaching staff to figure out how to use an explosive player? Because Robinson and Gibbs, for that matter, They are outstanding receivers. When you watch both those guys who can detach from the formation as wide receivers, they both look like wide receivers when they run routes. So the flip side is, okay, you're not drafting Bijan Robinson to be the foundation of your offense, to give him the ball 22 times a game necessarily, although there may be a week or two that happens. Look, we saw Miles Sanders have 27 carries in a game last year. Those things happen depending on the nature of a given game. But you're not drafting him to say, hey, everything we do starts with him. You're drafting him because you know what? He's an explosive offensive weapon. And we're going to figure out how to use and deploy an explosive offensive weapon that doesn't necessarily have to be next to the quarterback and get the ball in a handoff. There's other ways to deploy him within the context of an offense. So I think about that as well. Why would a team, and this is not Eagle-centric what I'm saying now, I'm trying to talk a little more philosophically, why would a team pass up an explosive offensive weapon just because he has RB next to his name?
Absolutely. It's a good point. Obviously the discussion about contract and second contract and where you're at in prime of the year all goes into place along with positional versatility. And as you mentioned, that's not a conversation that only the Eagles have, but all teams when looking at running back.
Right. Because at some point, how many times have we had this conversation? Sorry, Geoff, to interrupt, but it's just
that's fine. Go for it.
Going through all these things now. How many times have we discussed that in very generic terms, offensively, what do teams want? Explosive plays. Defensively, what do teams want to stop? Explosive plays. So if you're looking for explosive plays, it just makes intuitive sense that you'd want explosive playmakers.
Exactly.
So why pass up an explosive playmaker, for something else? Then you have to figure out as a staff how best to deploy him.
No doubt about it.
Just want to say one thing on that. Greg, when you watch the tape and see the defenses react, I get it's college football, but they have to react. When he's lined up outside, is he singled up? Like, how are teams trying to defend him, and how good does he look lined up outside?
Well, college football, Adam, is totally different than the NFL. Because first of all, the symmetry of the field is totally different because of the hash marks. So defenses can't play the same way in college football as they can in the NFL. The larger point that's important for this discussion is that he is split out. And if you didn't know who he was, you'd say that guy's a wide receiver when he runs routes. Same with Jahmyr Gibbs. So that's the larger point. How Texas Tech chooses to defend Bijan Robinson in the pass game if he's split out is not necessarily relevant to how an NFL team might go about doing it. But you're dealing with a weapon, a guy. I mean, I can remember a catch. It was almost a skinny poach type route. I forget who it was against. But I watched the play 10 times and I said, this guy just looks like a wide receiver running this route. And that's what he looks like. So, again, it comes back to that larger point. The whole discussion about running backs is a fascinating one because at some point in this league, you do need to run the ball. But now, particularly with quarterbacks that really are a major factor in your run game, like the Eagles, okay, we know how that dictates what defenses can and cannot do. That changes everything. The Eagles' offense runs through Jalen Hurts because of what he does to a defense. So, people might love Bijan Robinson, and I'm not going to sit here and say who the Eagles will draft at 10 or not. We don't know this. History tells us they would not draft a running back, certainly under Howie Roseman, but we don't know that till they make the pick. But the Eagles' offense is really not built on a running back. It's built on a scheme that starts with Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with that contract, it's probably going to continue with Jalen Hurts, and they hope for quite a while. And I'll just conclude the conversation with, I know that teams that personnel people I've spoken to in the last 24, 48 hours who really know the Eagles well are kind of in the same boat we are, which is you never rule anything out, but knowing how the board seems to be shaking up with how many good defensive linemen or pass rushers and offensive linemen will be in that area, and knowing the identity of the Eagles, they expect the Eagles to be the Eagles, if that makes a lot of sense. With what they prioritize. Yeah.
It absolutely does. I mean, that's why as much as people might want Bijan Robinson, and he is a terrific player. In fact, I don't really have a weakness in his game, to be honest with you, other than he's a running back, and therefore he's not going to be a super high pick. But I just don't, if you're just trying to think about this, somewhat academically, it'd be hard pressed to think that they would take Bijan Robinson at 10. Now, again, you made a great point, Geoff. If the board falls a certain way and the Eagles all of a sudden are at 18 and Bijan Robinson is sitting there, that might be a different situation.
Correct.
But I'd be hard pressed to think they would take him at 10.
And Geoff, on your point, remember what TJ McCray told us, the former Eagles executive who was on our show for our Patreon subscribers. You asked him, okay, what do you think? He's like, oh, come on, it's Howie. It's offensive, defensive lineman. This guy worked for Howie.
Right.
This is first 100%. Response.
100%.
So, yeah. I mean, that's it. And what I thought TJ said was very interesting. He goes, one of the best parts about working for the Eagles, which made me really think about the way that I scout, is you cannot have enough defensive linemen. It may sound simple, but when you look at it in rotations and late in December when your guys aren't tired, that matters. That's why you do it.
And also,
100%. Go ahead.
Philosophy, Geoff. What are the Eagles? They're built on offense. They score a lot of points, correct? So what do they want to do in the second half of games? They want waves of pass rushers.
Right.
That's what they want. That's the way they want to play. They're an offensive team. Look, how many times last year there was a stat, and I don't remember it exactly, but I think, didn't they score the most second quarter points in the league? At one point,
the first 10 weeks, they were like they were blowing people. Yeah. They were blowing the history books away. Yeah,
weird.
Yeah. So I mean, the point is they think the way Howie thinks. They think of themselves and they think of the league as an offensive league. The goal is to score a lot of points and to score a lot of points early. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that the other team in the second half must become pass predictable. So what happens when the other team is pass predictable? You want to rush the quarterback. You'd ideally like to do it without having to blitz because you'd like to have 7 in coverage. So or 6 in coverage if you're going to rush 5, as they often do. But it's not really a blitz if it's 5 first-level defenders. But the point I'm making is they would like waves of defensive linemen. You're not going to make it through the season with just your starting group. So they want waves of defensive linemen who can rush the quarterback.
Absolutely. So let's get to that. Let's get to defensive linemen as we go through the prospects that could, and the way the board shapes up, be there at 10. We'll start with someone who, Greg, I believe you have said is your number 1 defensive player in this draft, and maybe even your top overall player in the draft, and that's the defensive tackle out of Georgia, Jalen Carter, who probably would be an easy top 3, top 4 pick, if not for some of the off-field issues around him. He's done a lot of work in the last week, too, visiting teams to try to, discuss his side and give himself a little bit. He is a person that the Eagles have talked with, and he even came out recently and said, if I'm at 10, the Eagles said they would take me, which I find to be pretty interesting there. I want to start with you, Adam, as far as Jalen Carter and where your understanding of where he stands with teams right now.
Yeah, let's start with the Eagles. So you mentioned, they visited with them, and Drew Rosenhaus's agent said, look, he's not getting out of the top 10. We're not going to visit with anyone else. What we're told, we got this today. That's why I wanted to hold off on going hard with this last night, because I wasn't totally sure. So we had to check into it. Apparently his meeting with them was really good. And he went through a lot of testing, whatever they do. When players come into the building, they gave him everything. They had a lot of background information. And they went over a lot. Look, when you have these visits, you spend the whole day with coaches, front office, security, whatever testing they give you. Apparently they felt really good about it. And that's why he's on their board. Like, that was the one thing we weren't totally sure. We didn't want to jump the gun, but we felt pretty good about what we found out today. I know you've got some information on this, and there's no question in my mind he's the best player for this draft from a on the field standpoint.
Yeah. Not
everybody feels the same way about his off the field stuff. Now, here's what I would tell you. I'd be very surprised if he made it to 10. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. I would agree with you on the surprise. Now, if they get to 10, it becomes a fascinating conversation because the Eagles have had put a lot of priority on character, off-field football character, everything with their first-round picks, with their early picks. They are outspoken about that. So this would cause a pretty interesting conversation. But like you mentioned, We have heard in the past on if players are completely taken off the board. Haven't heard that. He's on the board. That's correct. So clearly there must be a level of comfort. Greg, before I get your evaluation, one thing we know is that he was teammates with Jordan Davis at Georgia. Of course, the Eagles took Jordan Davis in the first round last year. I'm told they have a very good relationship. So there's not like this kind of concern from those who know the Georgia program and those who know these two guys. There's not concern that sometimes there's a concern that if you're around some guy you know and he drags you in one direction or one guy pulls the other guy in another direction, you get a bad thing going there. But from what I understand, that's not an issue there. So then it's really all about
Kobe Dean was there as well. So
correct, and Kobe Dean there as well.
To him as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a talent, though, Greg, how would he fit in the Eagles' defense?
Well, he fits in any defense.
Sure. But I just want to know how he fits. No, I'm just kidding. You can tell me anything you want.
He fits in any defense because you're dealing with a guy that is, he's sudden and explosive off the ball. He's got great lateral quickness. He's 314 pounds at the combine, but he has incredibly quick feet, elite first step quickness. He's short area explosive. He works incredibly well in confined space. And that's a really important point because defensive tackles have to work in confined space. And he's able to generate velocity and power in those tight confined areas and is able to build up speed without many steps. And that's really, really important. I thought he showed multiple moves as a pass rusher. He was very refined for a young player and being able to do that. It's funny. We talk about the off field, which, Adam, you guys follow that more than I do, the details. Sure. But as a player, he's very smart and very intuitive. He just has outstanding athleticism and speed for a man that size. You see him make pursuit plays outside the box. This guy can play in a one gap scheme. He can play in a two gap scheme. There were plays which we've all seen. I've seen probably more of them because I think I watched, watched 8 full games of Georgia this year on tape. So, there are just plays where he manhandles interior offensive linemen, just moves them out of the way. So he can control and displace, which is what you want with your defensive tackles. There's really nothing about him from the standpoint of playing on the field that you don't like or you don't feel is really high level to translate effectively to the National Football League.
So to follow up on that, when you're watching his tape, Adam and I had a really interesting conversation recently with, I think this one was with Greg Gabriel, who was a scout for the Eagles, and he worked for the Bears, college scouting director a long time. And he explained to us the difference between football character and off-field character. And he used Lawrence Taylor as an example of a guy who obviously had his demons off the field, but on the field, his football character was through the roof. He ate football. He lived football. He breathed football. He's exactly what you want in a football player. When you watch Jalen Carter's tape, any signs of taking plays off or thinking that he just anything that would concern you from a football character standpoint?
Not watching his tape. Again, I don't know the player, but I will say this. He played 32 snaps per game in 2022, and he played significantly more as the season progressed. So you saw him play more and more snaps, which is a really positive sign. But no, from a football character standpoint, watching him on the field, I didn't feel he took plays off. Now, the one thing you could say, and this is not really a knock, but if you really wanted to look, which teams should be doing, he made a lot of splash plays, great individual plays. Is a defensive lineman, a D tackle, a dominant player on every snap? No. Certainly he's not, and he wasn't at Georgia. No defensive tackle really is, a dominant impact player on every single snap. That's not the way the position really works.
Right. Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. As Adam said, it's a difficult, as long as teams like him, and that's the big question that we don't know for every team.
Right.
Hard to see him really getting down to 10th overall. Let's move to the other side of the ball because we're going to do edge after this. I wanted to go to offensive line. Obviously, right guard Isaac Seumalo is now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cam Jurgens, you want to say might be the next man up for the Eagles, but he's never really played right guard before, and it's a position the Eagles pay a lot of attention to in the draft in the first round. Especially, I want to talk about the Ohio State product, Paris Johnson Jr. Now, this guy is 6'6", 313 pounds. He's got guard experience from a couple of years ago and tackle experience, which he played at Ohio State this past year. 36 and 1/8 inch arms, which is really good for a tackle and probably pretty darn good for a guard too, I would say. And someone who has been, as we talk to people around the league, someone has top 10 type talent, or at least top 10 projection. Adam, I know that you and I have both talked to some people, and we'll get Greg's evaluation in a second, who like the kid, but they also think that there are some questions with whether it's footwork or hips and things like that. I don't want to call him polarizing. I mean, he's a good prospect, but there are some questions about him.
Yeah, I don't want to say teams are all over the board on him, but he's definitely going to go in the upper half of the first round. It's just you're going to see the guard tape either one way or the other, because some coaches I spoke with said he's a major project at guard, and some said, wait a minute. He was thrown in there, wasn't really fair. Yeah, he's got two issues. His footwork and the technique, the hand placement, because he's not used to it. But you can't teach length. He's apparently a great kid. He just, the sorting part of it, as we understand it, is the challenge when traffic's coming to him. But he's definitely impressed. Eagles really like him. And we're also told with him here is that he got the stout stamp of approval. Which obviously is important. We've heard that. And we know other O-line coaches in the league really like this kid, because he's been talking to a couple coaches you and I have over the last couple of weeks. Teams really like meeting with him, open to doing whatever he's being asked. Because the thing is, he may play guard. Look, obviously, if he comes here to Philly, he's playing right guard. But
to start,
whoever drafts him, and by the way, there might be other teams that look at him as a guard. So you got to be open to doing that. Look, remember what happened with Dillard? Part of the reasons why it didn't work out here with him in Philly is because he didn't really want to play guard until this past season. And if he would have done it years ago, he probably would have made a lot more money and could have helped the Eagles a little bit better.
Greg, I talked to an AFC team yesterday about Paris Johnson, and they said that they acknowledge that some of those questions that are out there are there, but they're sort of, I don't want to say overblown, but if you pay too much attention to him, you're ignoring the fact that he's a specimen of an athlete and a really good player at that position. Do you agree with that tape? Watching his tape
about
Paris Johnson?
I watched him last summer, so I saw a ton of games when he played right guard, and then I watched him this year. So I've seen him play both right guard and left tackle. I actually thought he was pretty darn good at right guard. Left tackle is there's, as you guys have said, there's sort of a divergence of opinion on him. Some have said he's an elite athlete. I don't think he's an elite athlete. When I think of elite athletes at left tackle, I think of Trent Williams. I think of Laramie Tunsil. I don't think he's at that level of athlete, which doesn't mean he's a bad athlete, but he's not at that level of athlete. Right. I thought in watching his tape at left tackle, I thought that he was a little mechanical and robotic. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but I didn't think he was kind of loose-hipped. I thought that he was a little stiff at times. What concerned me at times was he was beaten by speed to power. If you watch him against Iowa, you would see that Lucas Van Ness a number of times just got his hands inside his chest and just drove him back into the pocket. Now, that's fixable, and then you have to speak to specific coaches. A coach, and I don't know how Jeff Stoutland feels. I certainly haven't spoken to him about it, but he may say, I can fix that in a week. Some coaches say that. Other coaches say, that's a real problem, and I'm concerned about it. It all depends on who you speak to. But I did speak to a coach who I know well, and I mentioned that I thought he was a little mechanical and robotic in his pass sets, and that coach agreed with me. So you can get divergent opinions depending on who you speak to. This particular draft, he's going to be drafted high because I can tell you right now, when you're 6'6" plus with 36 and an eighth arm length and an 85 and an eighth wingspan, you're going to be seen as a left tackle. Now, the Eagles draft him. Obviously, they have their two tackles. He's not going to supplant Mailata or Lane Johnson. So he would get his shot at right guard, clearly. But I think you're drafting him with the expectation that he will play tackle at some point, simply because the physical attributes suggest that he's a tackle.
Gotcha. So now let's open this discussion then, because there are two other linemen, offensive linemen, that Adam and I know that the Eagles like and have shown interest in, that enter the equation here. One is Northwestern's Peter Skronsky, right? And the other, who probably doesn't get enough conversation, is the kid from Tennessee, Darnell Wright. And so based on what you just said, Greg, I find it interesting because I think it jibes with what a personnel person, a high-ranking one yesterday told me. And he basically said he thought Darnell Wright from Tennessee has better tape right now than Paris Johnson. And they said
I
he
would
thought
second,
Peter.
I would second that emotion 1,000%.
Right. And he also said Peter Skronsky at guard probably say the same thing, but he could see a team like the Eagles or another team that really prioritizes offensive line still going with Paris Johnson for the positional versatility, and B, for what you might get 3 or 4 years down the road, as opposed to what these guys are right now. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. You're not only drafting for today, you're drafting for what's going to happen in a year or two, for sure. You know, do you want to discuss Skronsky and Wright?
I would like to, yes.
Okay. Skronsky is a fascinating watch because he is such a good football player. He competes at a really high level. He's so tough mentally and physically. He's a technician. He understands angles. He understands leverage in the run game. His footwork and balance and hand usage in pass protection are really, really good. He's just your classic guy that's assignment sound and execution efficient, literally on every snap. You know, he's a good athlete. Again, I wouldn't call him a great athlete. I think he's a good athlete, but he understands angles so well that he just consistently would beat rushers to the top of the high side arc. He'd expand his landmark if necessary. He didn't get beat inside because he had such great balance, so he prevented inside counters. I mean, this guy is just a really, really good player. The question with him is 32.25-inch arms. That's the question. You're going to get divergent opinions on that as well. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm right or wrong. I see him better as a guard. Doesn't make me right. That's my opinion based on doing this for a long time and conversations I've had. I guarantee there'll be people that will see him as a tackle because he played in the Big Ten for 3 years at left tackle and was really, really good. So, it's like if the Eagles were to draft him, I'm not a betting man, obviously, but it would not surprise me at all if he was their starting right guard day one.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to think so.
He's just a technician. He just gets it. He knows how to play.
Right. Adam, what is your sense, right, if both Paris Johnson and Peter Skronsky are available at 10?
And Carter's gone. And
I mean, if it's really, I'm if they had to choose between those two, forget that. Let's say the only two options that in the entire draft are those two.
I would lean towards, based on what you and I have heard, Johnson.
Yeah.
Which is a little surprising, but you asked me a question, I'm going to tell you. It's kind of what this show's about tonight. First time we've actually done a pre-show, I think.
Right.
And that's kind of what I've thought all day. Nothing that I've heard's changed my mind, but
by the way,
it could come down to that.
Here's the question.
Yep.
What is Paris Johnson for the Eagles? Not this year, because this year, what is he down the road? How old is Jordan Mailata?
29, I think.
All right.
No. I'm sorry. He's way younger than that. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
It's way younger.
I thought he was like 26 or 27.
Yeah, 27. Yeah.
So do they see him down the road as their starting right tackle if Lane Johnson, who's older? Where do they see Paris Johnson down the road?
See, that's a great question. I was just going to say, Mailata turns just 27 in March. He just turned 26. He turns 27.
He's not replacing Jordan Mailata.
Mailata's not going anywhere.
No. But
Lane Johnson, from what we've been told, they feel strongly because he's doing great with everything that's going on the last couple of years. Everything's going well. People around him think he's playing 3 more years. Okay.
All right. So that my question still stands. If they draft Paris Johnson, what is Paris Johnson to the Eagles?
A guard probably for 3 years at least.
Okay.
At least, yeah.
So he would end up getting a shot to be a right guard, which is what he played in 2021 at Ohio State the whole season.
Sure. Right. And on that, Greg, okay, this brings up another question. Speaking of Lane Johnson, he was drafted to be the left tackle. No one thought he'd stay at right tackle for long.
And now he doesn't want to leave right tackle because he's one of the 2 or 3 best offensive linemen in the entire league.
And by the way, probably going to be a Hall of Fame player.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the sense of the conversations, Greg, I had today is that you just take a player that you think is great and you know you will find a place for him, and it's at a position that you value because you can't predict the future. I mean, this goes back not just to Lane Johnson, who was drafted to eventually be a left tackle but never moved there, but Sean Andrews was drafted to be an offensive tackle who was going to start his career at guard, and he played guard at a really high level for the Eagles. And it just so happens Runyon kept playing and Trey Thomas kept playing. And when it was finally time to move Sean Andrews to tackle, I think about 4 or 5 years into his career, his back issues suddenly flared up. And
I look, I know you guys have spoken to probably people a lot smarter than I am about O-line play, but I thought he played well at right guard in 2021 because I watched that tape. And I did that last summer, not because just because I knew he'd be coming out this year. I had read that they were going to move him to left tackle last summer, but I still said, you know what, I want to check this guy out. So I watched him, and I actually thought he played pretty well at right guard. So, I think that if they drafted him and said, you know what, he's in our competition for right guard, I think he would personally, again, my pointless point of view on this, I think he'd win the job.
I think it would be no contest, to be honest with you.
Not like, and it's not a shot at Cam Jurgens or Jack Driscoll, but I don't think the competition will be very stiff.
Don't forget, Cam Jurgens came to Nebraska as a tight end. He's a bulked up 305 pounds. He's not getting any bigger.
Correct. So I don't want to just move on though without still again mentioning Darnell Wright. He's a prospect the last few days that a lot of personnel people have said, don't forget about this guy. He's a really good player. Greg, you just acknowledged his tape might be the best of all three.
I got a bromance with Darnell Wright, Geoff. I got a bromance with Darnell Wright.
You admitting it? Wow,
like
go ahead.
So it's just that before you go into it, Greg, I do want to say though that maybe the reason that you don't hear his name or see it in the whatever is when he was at Tennessee, they had a coaching changeover from Pruitt to Heupel, right? And apparently he had some maturity issues throughout that. But I have been told that over the last year, teams that have looked into him they've liked what they've seen. Now, maybe not every team, but the people I've spoke to said that he has matured up. And that's why he's now starting to enter that equation as a guy that could very easily go in the top 10, 12, 15 there. And a lot of people I've spoken to don't think he's going to get, once that run starts, if Skronsky and Paris Johnson are gone early, then Wright might be the next one off.
He's the most powerful offensive line prospect in this draft class. He came out of West Virginia. He was a consensus 5-star. He was a top 10 prospect nationally, regardless of position coming out. In 2021, he played left tackle at Tennessee and did not play it really well because I watched that tape. This year, he played right tackle. He was a dominant player. His footwork was much calmer, more efficient. His balance was significantly better. His strength to anchor is off the charts. If you watch the Alabama tape, which I did multiple times for many different players, he just stoned Will Anderson every single time because Will Anderson is a power player, not a bendy player, and Anderson is a speed to power rusher, and he just kept trying to rush speed to power against Darnell Wright, and Darnell Wright stoned him every single time. He's the most physically dominant offensive lineman in this draft. Now, the question is, he is 6'5", okay? And he weighs 333 pounds. And very good arm length, almost 34 inches, great wingspan. Amazingly enough, ran a 5 40, which is remarkable for 333 pounds. He certainly has the body type to move inside to guard, without question. And, obviously, if the Eagles were to draft him, he would be the right guard. But he had a dominant year, and I really liked his tape a lot.
There you go. All right. So maybe someone to keep your eye on, excuse me, especially if maybe the Eagles move down out of 10, just a few spots. Darnell Wright. All right. Last thing I'm going to say about this is that, we talked about the positional versatility and the projection. And I think that's what gives Paris Johnson Jr. my sense of maybe over a lead over, because Skronsky, again, might have the better tape right now. Same thing with Wright, but Paris Johnson Jr. can play both positions. He has played both positions. And, Adam, you mentioned the Stoutland stamp of approval. That usually goes a long way in the NovaCare complex. So I think that's an important thing to hone in on.
We know Howie Roseman will make the call. It's his decision. What they do, he's personnel control, but it gets filtered through the offensive line coach. They should. They have such a high respect for Stoutland. He's amazing. We all know that, Stoutland University and all that stuff. One other guy if you talk about, here's a question, Geoff, before we move on to Anton Harrison.
Yeah.
Do you think Eagles' potential interest in Wright, would it be, if their board gets obliterated, would it be a 10 or would it be a trade down candidate, potentially?
It's a great question because it sort of depends on who, are all the pass rushers and some that we're about to get into also gone?
Oh, yeah.
And what if nobody wants to trade up to 10 and you have to make a decision on a guy that you didn't have there and you can't move down? It's pretty rare that Howie can't figure out a way to move down when he wants to, but just in case. But I do think he'd be more of someone I sense who'd be available on a trade down, but not too far down, because again, once Johnson and Skronsky are gone, I know some people like Broderick Jones. Is there another tackle that I'm missing? I got more positive tape breakdown from people on Darnell Wright than Broderick Jones. That's just me though.
And one guy, Greg,
that would be fair based on tape study.
Okay.
Broderick Jones is a futures, as they say, I guess in certain businesses, he's a futures commodity. He has the fewest snaps of any Division I offensive tackle in this draft.
Wow.
Because, yes, he's not overly experienced. He's got significant technique issues. He's a good, not great athlete. He's a sloppy, undisciplined player at this moment. But there's certain things you like about him because he is a good athlete, but he needs a lot of technique work, a lot of discipline work. And then you have to decide if, theoretically, everything is coachable for the most, obviously you're not going to make a guy who's not a good athlete a great athlete, but I'm talking about technique stuff. Everything theoretically with technique is coachable, Geoff, but it doesn't always take. You can coach it all day long, but it doesn't always happen on the field.
Gotcha.
Greg, a guy that Geoff and I heard that I'm thinking it's a trade down is Anton Harrison from Oklahoma. Do you remember seeing him?
Oh yeah, I watched him for sure.
What do you think?
I liked Anton Harrison. I watched a ton of his games too because Oklahoma had guys. I think that he's got a lot of the traits needed to play in the NFL at left tackle. Some could see him as a right tackle, and it's always easy to say a guy's a guard. I mean, I think we say that reflexively, but he's got really good size, really good arm length. For whatever it means, other than the fact that he's a good athlete, he ran a 4.98 40, by the way. That's pretty remarkable.
10-yard split was also pretty good.
1.8. So, I mean, I think he's got strong, heavy hands. He's got good core strength. He's got plus athletic movement. The more I watched him, I felt he could be a quality starting left tackle in this league. Now, keep in mind one thing, and this has to be taught, given the structural foundation of the pass game at Oklahoma, he was not asked to do a lot of vertical pass sets, which you have to do in the NFL. So that's something that would need to be worked on, but that's a technique thing. So the assumption would be, because he is a pretty good athlete, that he'd be able to do that. But I really thought he had the traits, the competitive demeanor to develop into a quality starting left tackle. That's the way I saw Anton Harrison.
I have to give a lot of credit to our own InsideTheBirds.com's Andrew DeCecco. Wrote a story today about some under-discussed prospects he could see going in the first round. First guy he mentioned was Anton Harrison, and he's also mentioned the Wisconsin center. I hope I get his name right. Joe Tippmann. Yeah,
Another one of my favorites.
Yep, I had someone tell me today that they felt Tippmann was a far better prospect than the Minnesota center, Michael Schmitz.
Which I agree. I couldn't agree with that.
Okay.
Awesome. I don't think there's really a comparison between the two. To me, the Minnesota center reminded me of Ben Jones.
Okay.
Who played in the league for 10 years, but had a fifth round pick. And you wouldn't say, I mean, to me, the Minnesota center is not a late first or a second round pick, maybe not even a day 2 pick. But again, others could strongly disagree with me. I really like Joe Tippmann a lot. He's 6'6" for a center. He's really athletic. He's got tremendous length. I really liked his tape a lot.
Awesome. Well, that's a good time for me to remind everyone after the show, you got a half hour before the draft starts, head over to InsideTheBirds.com and check out that story by Andrew DeCecco about those prospects that he thinks can sneak into the first round. There are several, 3 or 4 others that he had. All right, I want to move on to the edge rushers. Always have to talk about edge rushers, pass rushers, especially when you talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. But we do have someone who paid to ask a question. Want to get on that. And I also want to remind everybody that it's Ocean Casino Resort's 5th birthday this summer. They can't wait to celebrate with you. Join Ocean for exciting promotions and sweepstakes, headline entertainment, the best day life and nightlife lineup in AC, the debut of the birthday bar, exclusive local collabs and partnerships, commemorative 5th birthday merchandise, and so much more. Don't miss stunning fireworks and unique events all summer long. Plus, Ocean Rewards members will enjoy over $5 million in gifts and prizes. So be sure to sign up for an Ocean Rewards card to get in on the fun next time you visit. That's Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. It's the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. Let's get to the question that was asked of us, and because we're on the subject of pass rushers anyway, and Greg, I know you're going to have a real fun time with this question. And the question is, do you think that Will Anderson has comps to Von Miller?
No.
No. Okay, let's move on to our next.
Thank you.
Tell us what, I know you've broken down Will Anderson for us on the Intel with Greg Cosell, which is on our YouTube and podcast platforms. But for those who haven't seen it, what is your evaluation of Will Anderson, who, no matter what you say, is still not going to be there at 10 for the Philadelphia Eagles, I would imagine.
He's not.
Yeah. Von Miller is a motorcycle lean pass rusher. He's got great bend and great flexibility. Will Anderson is not that kind of pass rusher. Will Anderson's game is built on explosive power. He's a speed to power rusher, great hand usage, but his game is built on power. He's a little tight-hipped. He's a little straight line linear. But one thing he does exceptionally well, and this is not talked about a lot, is he finishes. When he gets near the quarterback, he finishes. A lot of guys can get near the quarterback and they do not finish. He's a finisher. But when you watch Alabama's tape, and I watched him in 2021 when he had the big numbers year, and this year, of course, Alabama was a team that did a lot of slanting and a lot of stunting. And that really helped the numbers. Now, again, that has nothing to do with traits. That's Adam knows this for 100 years when I still talk about quarterbacks. You separate the quarterback, his traits and his attributes from everything else. You evaluate the quarterback in a vacuum. You have to evaluate players. Yes, they're in a scheme, but the scheme can help with numbers, but that doesn't change their traits and attributes. So you have to evaluate the traits and attributes. And Anderson, he's just a naturally powerful man. I mean, he's got short area strength. He's got power. He can move people on contact. He's really strong in that regard, but he's not a motorcycle bend guy. And I think people can picture what I'm talking about with motorcycle lean. He's not that guy.
I love that description, by the way.
Von Miller is. Von Miller is.
Yes.
Motorcycle lean. I've never heard you say that before.
Lean. I like that.
I was saving it for tonight, guys.
Okay, where did you get it?
Who'd you steal that from, Greg? You're
I'm not going to tell you that.
To think of that yourself.
All right, I'm gonna see. I got to go through all the coaches you've told me. I'm just kidding. Anyway, okay. It's all good.
I did get it from a good coaching friend of mine, and I loved it because it's so descriptive.
Still good motorcycle.
It is beautiful. It is beautiful. So I'm glad you bring that up. So really, the purpose of this show, we're talking about the Eagles, 10th overall. So we don't want to spend too much time on prospects we don't think will make it there. The other kind of pass rusher who might go top 5 is Tyree Wilson, who Adam was talking about before. Interesting what we get from personnel sources on these two guys as far as what they are now and what they could be. You talked about Will Anderson, and the technician is sort of what I got, whereas Tyree Wilson's still a little bit learning the position, learning how to use his body, his leverage, very unfinished and raw compared to Will Anderson, I'm told, Greg, but if he gets coached up and reaches his potential, maybe more of a impact pass rusher because of his athleticism than, say, a Will Anderson. Is that jive? You
got a guy that's 6'5.5", 271 with almost 36-inch arms and a wingspan like Giannis in the NBA. So that immediately gets people excited, just like we spoke about Paris Johnson as an offensive lineman. So people get excited because the size, the length, the overall athleticism, the alignment versatility. At this moment in time, his game is built more on strength and power and relentlessness than true athleticism, but he does show flashes of bend and flexibility to lead you to believe he can do that. There were two things that were concerning watching his tape. Now, I assume this can be taught. He had a tendency when he was in a 2-point stance to be too upright. So what would happen is when the ball was snapped, he'd have to bend, because you can't do anything standing straight up in any sport. You know, you need to have some bend to you. So it would necessitate knee bend and false steps at the snap, and he would be late off the ball. And that happened quite a bit. He'd be a beat late off the snap. And in the NFL, if you're a beat late off the snap, you ain't winning. So, but as far as traits, he's a high-level traits guy. Look, think of guys like him in recent drafts. He's similar size and weight to Trayvon Walker, to Joe Tryon. Going back a few years, Jason Pierre-Paul, Carlos Dunlap. These are all guys that look like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's pretty good company there for
Good
him. Adam, and what was, again, you don't see any shot that Tyree Wilson makes it to 10, do you?
I would be surprised, but just, again, what you get a lot of truth on Thursday. The teams aren't going to tell you exactly who you're going to draft.
Oh, really?
No. They're not going to tell you you're going to draft. But if you ask teams specifically about players that they probably won't be drafting, they're happy to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if they're not picking in the top 10. But anyway, so when I asked about Tyree Wilson, I did get a lot of, listen, we've got the scans. He's good. We don't like the fact that he didn't work out before the draft. It's not his fault.
Right.
It's just that it's in the recovery for the Lisfranc injury. It's a minimum of 6 months.
Yes.
And you don't want him working out when because if he's got to work out at the 3-month mark or the 4-month mark, he's not going to be quite where he'd be in 6. It's just not fair to him. So he's a victim of circumstance. I'm not saying I'd be surprised if he wanted to, but I still think he goes in the top 10.
Okay.
Because it's about projection.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much where you are this year. In 3 or 4 years, or 4 years when your 5th-year option is due, where's he at? Because if you're picking in the top 10, other than the Eagles, and probably the Lions, because they have the Rams pick, and the Lions should be pretty good. But there's a reason why they're probably not a very good football team.
Right.
How patient are you going to be? Are you going to wait for him? Because he'll be ready to play this season. That's not in question. But how good could he be? Because he may miss a chunk of their offseason program. Who knows? So that is a concern.
I think, Geoff, you get a little more leeway with defensive players than offensive players for this reason. People understand that on defense in the NFL, 18, 19, 20 players play every week on defense because of all the situational packages. So you can draft a Tyree Wilson, and even if he plays 18 snaps a game, if he's really good on those 18 snaps, then he's had a quality rookie year. He doesn't have to play 60 snaps a game. You want him to get there at some point, but that doesn't have to happen as a rookie, and he still can be a factor in your defensive schemes.
One could argue that Derek Barnett's most productive season for the Eagles was his rookie season when he was part of a rotation and could come in with fresh legs. All right, let's move the conversation to some guys who will probably be available at 10, that we know the Eagles like. Now, one of these guys we know the Eagles fans don't like. Maybe it's because he wasn't a starter. Maybe it's because he played at Iowa and Iowa wasn't a great football team. Maybe it's because it's not SEC. But Lucas Van Ness is not, when we put it out there to the people, a very popular name among the Eagles fans. But Adam and I know he's a popular guy in that complex. He's got great positional versatility. He can play multiple positions on the D-line. And Greg, I'm going to just segue that to you and what you think about his tape.
Guy's a power player, Geoff. Plays with, in fact,
say it louder.
He's a power player.
There you go.
In fact, you watch him against Paris Johnson, and that was a game where I felt like I was concerned about Paris Johnson.
Lucas Van Ness, you're going to talk about that. Go ahead.
Lucas Van Ness, just speed to power, would get inside of Johnson's chest and drive him right back into the pocket. Now, keep in mind, in 2021, he predominantly lined inside at D tackle. In 2022, he aligned far more snaps at DN, but still significant snaps inside. So, do you have to decide where he plays? If you're the Eagles, probably not. He can probably do both. He's another guy that's more straight line linear than flexible. I don't think he's a bendy guy. I don't think he can flatten his rush path, off the high arc, but he's really strong, great strength throughout his body, physically dominated people at times. I'd be very curious, okay? and keep this in mind, I'm not making an apples to apples comparison, so I don't want people to think that I'm saying he's exactly this guy, although this guy wasn't this guy when he came out of college, by the way. I think if Lucas Van Ness, who's 272, could get up to 285, and a lot of people are telling me that he can do that, that's within his body, the way he looks, maybe even 290. I think stylistically, he's a J.J. Watt kind of player.
Who can sort of be
again,
an end.
I see Adam's face, and because I hope people aren't thinking that I'm saying that he's J.J. Watt. But, J.J. Watt was not J.J. Watt when he came out of Wisconsin.
Correct.
That's right.
Correct. In fact, let me ask you a question. Was he a walk-on in Wisconsin?
Initially,
Yes.
yes. So,
but I just want to add on Van Ness. This goes on your J.J. Watt point. I was told he could probably play 4 D-line positions.
yes, he can. He did that at Iowa.
And that is pretty impressive. I know he's not super bendy. He's a power player. He, as one person said, he finds a target and he's going to hit. He's going to find it. He's going to hit you.
That's what he is.
He's pretty good at it. Now, Greg, when you project players like this, what can they be at the next level? Because does he have to find more pass rush moves?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's no question at this point.
What would concern you?
Yeah, there's no question at this point. He doesn't really have secondary moves. I mean, when speed to power is stopped, he's stalled. He doesn't really have counters at this moment. But for whatever reason, watching him, Adam, and sometimes I get this feeling with players, sometimes I don't. I sense he'll be an ascending player. I think as he gains experience, he'll develop more as a pass rusher. He'll have a wider array of moves and counters. I think he'll become a quality pass rusher.
Gotcha.
That may be more from the inside than the outside. I think that has to be thought about with Lucas Van Ness, which from the Eagles' perspective may not matter at all because of the way they play. That could be perfectly wonderful. But I just see him as an ascending player. I see him in 3 years being a potentially really good player.
Hey, Geoff, one thing. You and I had a conversation today. What do you know about or do we know? Sean decide, like, okay, let's say they drafted Van Ness, for example, because we don't know the specifics, right, on what he's looking for. Is that correct?
I remember being told, Adam, when just a couple of weeks after they had hired him, maybe coming out of the combine a few weeks, that there was still some kind of uncertainty about exactly what he wanted in defensive linemen. I mean, they lose Javon Hargrave. Does he want the next Javon Hargrave? Is he flexible? What's his plans for Jordan Davis, who we know has some work to do? What kind of alignment and technique does he want? Does he care? All these are questions that have to be answered that I have not gotten any further feedback on. So you just said the truth comes out right during the draft. And I do feel like I'm looking toward this draft and the pass rushers, especially because they're all very different. And I mean, Lucas Van Ness and the next guy we're going to talk about are pass rushers, but they're completely different guys. And you wouldn't even put them in, I guess, the same category because they're different, right?
Yeah,
correct.
So that to me is the big question mark, is what are they looking for in Javon Hargrave's replacement, or are they even? Do they just say we take a great pass rusher and figure it out?
Well, Jalen Carter would be that guy, obviously, but
yeah,
he probably won't
Tyree Wilson had meaningful snaps inside of offensive tackles in college. So
how did he do? How did he look?
Yeah, he has those snaps.
Did he look good inside?
Oh yeah, he can. Okay. I mean, the guy's over 270 pounds. He's not a little edge pass rusher.
No, and the arms are long.
Yeah.
Oh, and one thing on Van Ness, it wasn't just we were mentioning for 6 weeks. The actual Eagles really do like him. That's just to add to that. We've not really talked how much they liked him. No, they he's super high up there for 10. It's, we have to look at before we get out of here. Okay, if these guys are on the board, who's it going to be? But no, Van Ness is definitely a guy they have a lot of like for his tournament scouting.
Yeah. So, all right. So that's one guy that, and again, the opinion of personnel and teams versus fans, totally different. Another guy that we have to discuss, and again, totally different body type, still a pass rusher, but he has to factor into this conversation because analytics, we know, plays a very big role in what the Eagles do. Athletic testing and measurables. Why did they pick Jordan Davis last year? It wasn't because, as Greg has noted, he played 50, 60 snaps and just dominated games every single snap, right? He was only about 20 snaps per game, but nobody is ever tested at 340 pounds like Jordan Davis did, and they saw upside and potential. Well, his teammate once was Nolan Smith, the edge rusher from Georgia, who tested off the charts and also happens to be a guy who was very productive in college and also known as a great character kid. That's what I've been told. People love him, good leadership, everything. So that's a lot of boxes right there that this guy checks off. And again, we know how much the testing and the analytics play. Now, Greg, when we talked to you about Nolan Smith for the show, The Intel with Greg Cosell, you loved him, I believe. You just had a question about where does he fit in a team's plans because of his size, right? He's 235 pounds.
He was 238 at the combine. He's got a really thin waist. I imagine, again, the other thing to keep in mind, and I actually had this discussion with one of my guys this week about edge players, because there's this sense that there's a threshold at which, in terms of weight, at which you can't really be an edge player in the National Football League. And from an intellectual perspective, that always strikes me as fascinating, because let's say you view Nolan Smith at 238 as below that threshold. So let's say he gets up to 244. Does that mean all of a sudden he can be a great edge rusher in the NFL? That to me does not seem to make intuitive sense. I mean, if there's a difference of 15 or 20 pounds, I get it. But, Nolan Smith is a freakish athlete. Now, I think as a pass rusher, he needs some work and refinement, but he's more powerful than his weight would suggest. He sort of has athletic power, not country strength, but athletic power. But he can bend. His athleticism is off the charts. He's got heavy hands. He had that one-arm stab, which he used really effectively. He drove back offensive tackles in the SEC on contact. He's twitchy. He's sudden. He's explosive. I think he can, essentially I see him as what Hassan Riddick is for the Eagles. He's a Sam linebacker who can rush the quarterback and can play in space, because he was not used exclusively as a pass rusher at Georgia. He played in space an awful lot, and he was a really good run defender. He's much stronger with his hands than one might think for his size.
Yeah, sounds like a prospect who, with some coaching too, if you combine the athleticism, some extra coaching, and projecting at the next level. If you're saying Hassan Reddick, what he is now, I imagine is what you mean. That's a pretty good prospect right there.
And you're 100% right, Geoff. I've heard that he is an unbelievably great kid in every way you could want a kid to be. Right. So, and we know how the Eagles, they look for that. They dismiss certain players who will not be Eagles. I was actually talking to someone today in the organization who basically told me, well, that guy will be on another team. Not about Nolan Smith, but about someone else,
Right.
Because the Eagles, that's important to the Eagles.
Two things. They interviewed Georgia's D coordinator, Geoff, right? For their
correct.
That's right.
I think it was Glenn Schulman.
Glenn Schumann.
Sorry, Schumann.
Right?
Yeah.
So they had intimate knowledge. I'm sure they know him. They have what we're told is a very good relationship with Kirby Smart. It's one of guy Howie knows has got to know through the scouting process really well. So they really know this player. He's definitely a guy they have interest in. Greg, I'm going to throw something at you. I don't know that they play the same. The guy's a pretty good NFL player, and he was actually smaller weight-wise when he was drafted by the Panthers. Brian Burns, I was told, may have weighed his final year at Florida State may have weighed
I think he was 229 at Florida State.
Right. But he might have actually been lighter than that, okay?
Yeah.
At one point. Now, you make a great point. You never know how much weight a guy could be put on, because then he could break down. So I just wonder, was Burns a guy were you concerned? Do you remember, like, oh boy, this guy's too small. I know he's explosive. Were you concerned about him when he came out?
I loved Brian Burns' tape. I thought that he was super bendy. Now, keep in mind, he's 6'5".
Yeah.
That's a big difference, okay?
Sure.
His arms were longer. He didn't run as well, but he was he's 6'5". And now at the combine that year, he got up to 249. I'm sure he did that just to get.
I remember.
Yeah. But I bet he played at 230, and maybe 225.
Wow.
But the difference would be in length. In that, Burns is longer, but Burns was Gumby-like. I think Smith has some of those Gumby-like qualities to him. So but again, it gets back to, he's 238. So and plus he's a young kid. He's 20 or 21. So he probably can get to 245. He's got a waist like my finger. He probably get up to 245. And, and then, I doubt he would lose any explosion in his body and any suddenness if he did that. I think he's a really good prospect. I would think that if the Cardinals traded out of 3, I think Jonathan Gannon would love to have Nolan Smith.
Oh, sure. After just watching what Hassan Reddick did for his defense, I would agree. By the way, a couple of things here that are almost staggering, right? And again, the Eagles pay attention to this stuff as much as anybody. 4.39 in the 40.
Yep.
For a defensive end is sick and insane, along with a 40. It's receiver time. Yeah. It's also crazy. A 41.5-inch vertical, which was better than DK Metcalf and Saquon Barkley. Again, a defensive end.
And a 1.52 10-yard split, which is really good.
Yeah. Boy, I mean, that just, let me tell you something, that checks a lot of boxes right there. But like you're saying, Greg, as far as, just personnel people I speak to and sourcing, it seems like this kid's all over the map. I spoke to a team that runs a 3-4 defense, and they love him, but they love him mid to lower first round. I've heard that he could go top 5 or 6. You just brought up Arizona as a potential landing spot. Some teams think the Patriots. One team said, watch the Patriots because he may have some Kyle Van Noy-like qualities about him, a guy who can rush the passer, run a little bit with maybe with some tight ends, because he's just so gifted.
It's funny you say that, Geoff, because a part of me watching Nolan Smith thought that he could be Fred Warner too by playing off the ball. Wow. So, again, I know there are some people who think that he could be a phenomenal off the ball stack backer. So, he's one of those guys, I think, whose talent is and his traits are really high level and could be seen in multiple ways.
Definitely. All right, we're going to move. Those are the edge rushers I wanted to go through. Anybody that really jumps out to you for 30th overall? Obviously someone who's a little bit less refined or just not as explosive as the top 10. But
yeah, for sure. If we're thinking about defensive linemen, because isn't that kind of what we're thinking?
Yeah. Edge rushers in this case, yes.
Okay. Well, I was going to go inside. Is that okay? Or do you?
Yeah, that's we can do that before we move on. Yeah.
Sure.
Mozzie Smith from Michigan.
Yep.
Mozzie Smith is a fascinating prospect. This guy is 6'3", 323, long arms. His combination of size, mass, and athletic movement is rare. I mean, this guy plays like an athlete, quick, fluid movement, yet he's big and stout. He can dominate physically with strength. He's got off-the-ball quickness. The more I watched him, and I kept watching games because Michigan had 3 guys that I wanted to see, so I kept watching. This guy was a really good inside pass rusher. I don't think there's another D-tackle prospect in the class, with the possible exception of Carter, who's not quite as big as Smith, with the size, mass, and live feet of this kid. I mean, I really like Mozzie Smith a lot.
Do you think that, as Adam says, do you think the truth would come out there? Because he's not he's not a guy who has a record of being a great pass rusher. He's got great athleticism.
Yeah, but you have to watch the tape, Geoff. There were a ton of plays where he got to the quarterback and the ball just was gone, but he had a great pass rush.
Okay.
Right. I guess I'm saying, would the truth come out there? Because a lot of teams see him as maybe a nose, and then the Eagles already have Jordan Davis. So if they played him next to Jordan Davis, is that maybe a sign of what Sean Desai is looking for, which might be different from what the last guys were looking for? Because you would have essentially sort of like 2 noses together instead of like a real Javon Hargrave type.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think this guy, in a 5-man front could probably play, doesn't have to be the nose, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe others would just say, oh, he's a nose and that's it. I think his movement would allow him to be a little bit more.
Gotcha. Sure. All right, we're going to move on to the last position. We're going to get into corner. Before we do that, really quickly, I have to clarify something I said on this morning's podcast that somebody alerted me to. Okay. I made a comment that something along the lines is, if the Bears took Paris Johnson 9th, the Eagles would be excited about it because they could run to the podium and take Lucas Van Ness 10th. We were just sort of going through prospects, and I feel like in retrospect, erroneously said that. So that was just sort of me going through prospects, knowing the Eagles like pass rushers, but we just spent a good deal of time talking about why Paris Johnson would be a great fit for the Eagles, because right guard right now is a big question mark for them. I think that's fair to say. And this guy has guard tackle flexibility. So I would like that comment from this morning's podcast to be struck from the record, if that's all right. It never happened, right? It doesn't exist, even though it's the internet and it's forever. All right, let's move on to cornerback. All right. This is a position, Adam, interestingly, that the Eagles have really, despite what people might think about them, have actually targeted at times in the last few years in the first round. It just hasn't worked out. Whether it was a Patrick Surtain or some other guys, they never had a chance at Sauce Gardner. But now that they've brought back James Bradbury and Darius Slay, maybe it changes how they view the position, but it's still, a guy like Christian Gonzalez, when we talk about athletic testing and what the Eagles look for, that's a good fit there.
What have you heard? Because this, when you brought this up, we were putting together you have to have, because we've discussed this in the history of our show.
Yeah.
Unless you're picking the top 5, you have to expand your list for who might be there. And if your list gets hit hard, you got to be, okay, who would I like if we could trade down who we get? But so the thing here we'll get to Gonzalez in a second, but just the cornerback position. We know this year who's starting without a doubt. We understand they're paying those 2 veteran corners a lot of money to start at least 2 more years. Realistically, that's going to be it. But as someone said to me earlier today, he goes, you're not seeing it clearly for year 2.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with splitting. Let's say that Philly drafted a corner this year in first or second round, right?
Mm-hmm.
In year 2, that guy could start getting these guys off the field, so give them a breather. You don't have to play Darius Slay at 33, 100% of the snaps. Maybe play 60% of the snaps, 65.
Mm-hmm.
And then for matchup purposes, when teams are going to spread you out, you see what you have. And now Gonzalez is a guy is really well liked, Greg and Geoff. So Geoff, do you feel like he's a guy that could be a target if the board works out a certain way?
I think the board, based on just sort of chatter, I feel like the board would have to fall like really oddly, where a lot of pass rushers, linemen are gone, right? And again, you can't, just because you want to trade down doesn't mean you can trade down. Sure. But I do, talking to some people who know the Eagles and how they think and how they view that position, feels like Gonzalez more fits the bill for what they would look for in a corner if they wanted a corner, than some of the other guys that you hear in the first round. I mean, he really, Greg, I'll go to you on this, because I believe you really liked his tape. I'll get to his non-tape in a second, but from a tape standpoint, I think you told us you thought he was the cleanest cornerback prospect in the first round.
I love Gonzalez's tape. He's smooth as silk. He's long. He's fluid. He played outside predominantly, but meaningful snaps inside. So he gives you outside-inside flexibility. He plays mirror match press man at a really high level. And by that, I mean where he plays press, but waits for the receiver to release before he gets in his hip pocket. But he also can be physical and press man. He's strong, active hands to disrupt routes. I think he's, arguably the best corner prospect in this draft. Don't forget, he's 6'1" plus. Mm-hmm. You talk about the analytics and the measurables. He ran a 4.38, a 41.5 vertical, a broad jump over 11. I mean, he fits every category. The tape and the athletic testing measurables match.
Right. So the only thing I'll add to that, and I've said this a little bit in the podcast, but it's still, I've talked to a lot of people on Christian Gonzalez, because I think probably like coming out of the combine or going into it, I looked at corner because we thought James Bradbury might walk as a real position of need for the Eagles, but it wound up that Bradbury came back. But still, there's not one person who didn't mention this to me when talking about Gonzalez. For what you see on tape, when you meet him, his demeanor doesn't scream like alpha dog, right? It doesn't scream presence and command. It does with some other guys like Joey Porter Jr. Of course, his dad's a linebacker in the NFL, Steeler, kind of, you'll hear that guy's got some dog in him. You hear Nick Sirianni just talk in general a lot about dog mentality. Just haven't heard that with Christian Gonzalez. And I just don't know how teams will view that, how important they think that is for a cornerback as opposed to a defensive end. I don't know. It's just a common theme. Adam, did you hear anything similar as far as demeanor with Christian Gonzalez?
I would not say about in meetings. I would say now 99% of the time we agree with Greg from people we speak with. Well, actually, I should say probably 99%. But I've got some guys who are very critical of his tape. They just found stuff that he needed to be physical enough, and he didn't make the play or didn't make the tackle. I'm not saying it's every play, but there's some tape going back some years where guys had some not only this year. I'm just telling you that there's some people who had some critical comments. I was surprised. They do acknowledge he's really talented, but if it's the job of these guys to really great tape, not only for 1 year, to go back. And there's some guys who just have some issues with some of his tape.
Watch him go number like 2 to the Cardinals, and it's like,
Hey,
I guess 30
it doesn't
people
matter to me. I'm
sandbagged
just
us
telling
all
what
on
people
his.
think. Yeah, you know how it is. Look, and Greg has always said this. He's loved some players or NFL guys don't like at all. It's just the way it is. And
yeah,
everybody has.
And just so you know, I did have 4 weaknesses in my weakness category for Gonzalez. Because that's just like a scout. I'm watching these guys and their strengths and weaknesses. And I may really, really like a guy, but I understand that there are some issues that need to be cleaned up.
Such as?
At times in press man got back on his heels, negatively impacting his balance, tendency to reach to compensate. Some routes in which he lost contact with the receiver at the top of the route stem and then had to recover. There were times in press man he had to take too many steps to stop when the receiver broke off his route. Needs to win more at the moment of truth. Too many plays he had outstanding coverage and did not play the ball. Those are 4 weaknesses.
Man, there was something to that, what you just said, the latter. Greg, there's something a little bit more strong. It's a family show, so I'm not going to say it, but there's just sometimes you need to be a little stronger.
Right.
A little tougher. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's the way, I watch this stuff in fine detail, as you guys know.
I get it.
Guys who I really like, when I'm finished, there's still things that need to be cleaned up.
Sure.
I'm sure people understand that no one comes into the NFL as a finished product.
Correct.
There's always things that need to be worked on, even with guys you really like.
Absolutely. All right. And again, just for clarification, because I know sometimes words can get taken out of context. Nobody said he's a bad kid. I've heard he's a good kid.
Really good
kid. Yeah. It's just that presence, that command, that demeanor that kept coming up in conversations.
A dog, like in an interview, you could tell when guys bring it sort of an attitude. Like in interviews, when you bring them to your building, you meet with them at the combine. It just doesn't mean he can't be a great player. Just some guys have a different presence. I get it.
100%. All right, so that's really what we're looking at here at 10th overall. We'll go recap the names again. Jalen Carter, obviously. Adam says, and I agree with him, that it's very unlikely that he falls to 10. We'll just have to see what it goes. Then you get to the linemen. You get to offensive lineman Paris Johnson Jr., Peter Skronsky. You get the defensive lineman Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith. And, that's 5 names right there. And if the board is wacky, everybody always says you always have to be watchful of Howie Roseman for a trade down or a trade up even, no matter what, just moving. We know the Eagles don't have picks in the 4th and 5th rounds. It'd be a minor miracle if they make it through this draft without picks in the 4th, 5th, major miracle, actually. And then I guess one thing we should just bring up is there's always the element of surprise, right? I mean, when we were in 2020, right, Jalen Hurts took us all by surprise. And, even Davion Taylor in the 3rd round. And that we know that Howie and the owner Jeffrey and his son Julian is more involved. We know that they are very deep into, getting the information and being a part of the decision. So there's always the element of surprise.
And they knew, Geoff, just like we all did, that this is what Jalen Hurts would become.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Of course.
Hey, one thing, someone asked me, and it's a great question. If it's Johnson or Lucas Van Ness, who's the pick? I don't know. I know we don't get access, folks, to their grade. We don't.
Right.
Well, we sometimes do, but it's, it mimight be 5 minutes after the draft if we ask certain people, but they're not. Right. Reporters they're not told before the draft.
How do you think, though, that they would, just knowing the team, right? Now I'm asking you, knowing the team.
I would say Van Ness. Again, I know they love Stout and they listen to him. I get it. It's going to be Howie's call. Mm-hmm. But if Van Ness, if the people we spoke to around the league think he's this talented, you heard what Greg said about him. Yes, he needs to improve his pass rush skill. But if he's a multi-positional player, way more than Paris Johnson. It's hard. This is not a great edge rusher class, and I know they have like potentially 12 picks next year. But if you get this kid in now, BG's most likely done after the season. Never say never, but he's a good chance he's done after the season. This kid's going to play a lot in year 2. He's clearly going to play some this year. This kid's a very intriguing player. That it's strictly a dart throw between the two. I just think that Van Ness right now is a better prospect. To answer your question, I think Van Ness is a little bit better prospect right now.
That's funny.
And Geoff,
real quick, Greg, I felt that going into the podcast that we recorded, but all day today, just knowing that right guard is a question mark and that this guy can play Paris Johnson guard and tackle, I almost flip-flopped it. I was with you, and then I thought, he's just plug and play right there, and it's not like you're reaching for an immediate need because you will probably need a tackle down the road. So it's a fun little jockey back and forth. What were you going to say, Greg?
I was just going to say, now that I'm trying to remember what the heck I was going to say. Oh, I think the sense that there's a strong sense, not only among the Eagles, but just in general, that Van Ness is clearly an ascending player, as I said, that he's really going to be a terrific player in 2-3 years. I'm not saying that Johnson can't get any better. I don't want people to think I'm saying this is Paris Johnson, that's all he is. That's not what I'm saying, but I think there's a real sense that Van Ness is kind of, I don't want to say a superstar, I hate words like that, but that he's clearly an ascending player who will be really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, just to throw a third into the mix, people who know the Eagles have told me that they can understand why the Eagles view Nolan Smith, who may obviously, as we talked about, not a finished product now, as someone who could really be a total game changer after what they just saw out of Hassan Reddick, if given the right opportunity, put in the right spots. So that's pretty interesting. And I think if it's anybody else at 10 than we mentioned, then hey, that's just the way the draft goes.
It is, yeah,
it is what it is. If it's a tight end, if it's John Kincaid and Michael Mayer.
don't. You want to get to 30 real quick before we get out of here?
Yeah, let's get to 30 real quick. Who are some guys, Adam, that you got your eyes on?
All right, so here are the names we've heard: Elijah Cansey, Brian Branch, Anton Harrison. Again, I don't know. Maybe you have a better feel, Geoff, about exactly where he should go. I've not heard high first round. Mozzie Smith is a guy to watch, we were told.
Yeah, I mentioned him. We talked about him. Yeah.
And then a guy, now this, again, we know how he probably wants to trade out one of these picks. Let's say it's 30 they trade out. Got to watch as the second round progresses. The Sidney Brown, I believe, is the safety out of Illinois.
Yes, safety from Illinois.
Yeah, he's a guy to keep an eye on. Brian Branch, I'm told the 4.58, they understand what he is. He's in their thinking. And
Brian Branch is a great football player.
That's why, Greg, because I think sometimes you got to just slow your roll with a 4.58 and understand what he is. He's a terrific football player.
Right.
Elijah Cansey. These are just some of the names at 30 that we've been told to focus on.
Yeah, Mozzie Smith is a name that we've been told to focus. But again, you said that you did say that.
I just say trade downs too. Some of these guys could be trade downs. Depends how the board goes.
Is there anybody that comes to mind? Last year, Howie Roseman traded a first-round pick for A.J. Brown. Is there anyone with maybe I don't think the 10th pick is going anywhere except in this draft, like up or down. But is there anything that the 30th pick or a combination of picks you think the Eagles? I mean, Budda Baker's name has been out there for a while. I mean, I certainly think that is in the realm of possibility. I don't think, by the way, it would be a first-round pick. I'm just talking about guys that would intrigue the Eagles for what their needs are.
I keep getting asked about Jeremy Chinn. I'm told that Chinn is going to be Jeremy Chinn, the safety for the Panthers, on the finder's rookie deal. They're not shopping him, but his position's he's going to be big nickel this year, which you're not going to be on the field as much. So I'm just going to keep an eye on him over these next 2 days.
Yep.
Want to address that because we've got a lot. We haven't talked about it in a while. We got questions. We just never had time for it, folks. We're sorry about that, but. Address that. I want to make it clear that they're not looking to trade him at this point, but just, you never know if Howie calls them and you never know what happens. And, but Budda Baker, Geoff, before we get out of here, you think they have some interest there?
I would just imagine. I mean, only because of the need at safety and the guy wants to, either more money or to be traded. I don't think it would cost an arm and a leg to get him because of his age and his contract. So, and again, the history of the Eagles, they've been making good, smart trades to bring in veteran players when they can. So that would be a name. I've been asking around about Javon Kinlaw just because the 49ers signed Javon Hargrave. They've got Nick Bosa. They're going to pay him. And they have another first-round pick on their line who's escaping me right now. Is it Armstead?
Yeah, but he's been around for a while. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if Kinlaw, who has not lived up to billing yet, is on the market. Some people I've spoke to said that is a good question to ask, but I've not heard that the 49ers are looking to shop him or get rid of him. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
All right. Listen, again, throughout the night, as we conclude here, we are going to be giving you more live streams. We're going to come back with you. It's going to be me and Greg Cosell after the Eagles make their moves in the first round. We could be on once, we could be on twice. Hey, we could be on 3 times, depending on what happens tonight. It's just that exciting. So make sure you're following us on Twitter at Inside Birds or at Geoff Mosher. Oh no, I'm now Geoff P. Mosher, at Geoff P. Mosher, at Greg Cosell, at Caplan NFL. We'll let you know as soon as we're about to come on, and we'll be on this YouTube channel and our other socials. So make sure you're following us throughout the night. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, and of course, big thanks to our sponsors, Ocean Casino Resort. I'm Geoff Mosher, and you've been watching the Inside the Birds NFL Draft Special.